again. My name is Tamara Stevenson. I actually don't know if I told you that before. I am a special education, we call them contact teachers, so special education case manager in Sun Prairie. Right now, I work at the high school in Sun Prairie. Also, just a small caveat, I have 2 little kids. So today I'm kind of living a working mom's nightmare in which my daughter got sick last night, barely slept. So I was late getting out the door this morning trying to figure out daycare and all that. Also had way too much coffee to make up for the not sleeping. And now I'm like jittery and just like, so if I start talking really fast or doing anything weird, I apologize in advance because it's been a weird day. Anyway, so yes, like I said, I'm a teacher at Sun Prairie High School. I've done a lot of things there. When I first started, I actually worked at our upper middle school and was just sort of a cross-cut teacher with students with more significant disabilities, developmental disabilities, and autism. Then I moved up to the high school for a couple of years in a regular cross-cut caseload. Then I was a transition teacher. Then I went to work at the Wasteman Center in Madison. Can you guys see this okay? Okay, good. Where I was an outreach specialist for the CISA project, which is confusing. It's not CISA like how we in Wisconsin think of CISA. It's the Center on Secondary Education for Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders. So it's kind of a mouthful. It was a large-scale, multi-site research study where the principal investigators took evidence-based practices in several different domains and brought people on board to be coaches to help teachers implement these practices to fidelity. And so then they kind of track student outcomes and things like that along the way. So we had students and teachers of schools in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and California. And again, like I said, we provided resources and coaching on these domains. So academic, peer and social, independence and behavior, and transition and families. And then they looked at outcomes. Student success in school, student engagement, student progress toward meeting goals in high school and then after high school as well. So just a disclaimer as well as we kind of talk through this. Some of these slides are from the CISA project, from the work that we did and trainings that we provided on transition. So you can find this work online. It's housed at the CISA website. And I'm not sure if this has been shared with you, but I will make sure that it is so you have access to all these links and references. So you can do that. And then the principal investigator at UW-Madison on this project is Leanne Smith-DeWalt. She's super knowledgeable, has a multitude of other studies going on as well, and is an incredible resource at the Wasteman Center. And Kate Sedone was the site coordinator for the project in Wisconsin as well. So that's just a little background on that. If you see the little square with the CISA logo at the bottom of the slide, that's how I'm noting that that's not necessarily my content, my ideas, that it's coming either directly or close to directly from the CISA PowerPoint. So I just want to put that out there so no one's confused. Also, as part of my weird morning, I forgot my little pointer thingy and clicker, so I'm kind of stuck here by my computer, which feels off to me. I normally would walk around a little, so I apologize for that. Okay, we have quite a few people in here, so I don't want to take a whole ton of time doing this. Maybe I was going to have people kind of share out their name and their role and the age group they work with, but maybe instead I will just ask, like I'll think of some groups of people who might be here and I'll ask if that's you, and you can raise your hand. Just so I get a sense of who my audience is, I always like to know. So do we have transition teachers here? Adult transition teachers? Okay. And transition coordinators from the district? Oh, okay. What about high school teachers? Program managers or program support? Okay. And parents? Ooh, lots of parents. Good. Okay. Good. Middle school teachers? or elementary? No? Okay. Transition isn't the first thing that comes to mind when you're a middle school or elementary teacher, although I would argue that it should be, so we'll get into that. Sort of, maybe give me like, instead of doing 1 to 10, let's do 1 to 5. If you could just give me a finger of how many, not the finger, but just how comfortable you are with transition, with the process, if you're a teacher. Oh, which groups did I miss, by the way? So a lot of people didn't raise hands.
All people with disabilities.
Okay, perfect.
School psychologists.
Okay.
Social workers.
Social workers, okay. Yes.
DVR.
DVR, fantastic. Anybody
Iris
else?
consultant.
Iris consultant, okay. Same, okay, awesome. Well, I'm so glad you're all here. This is a very diverse group with lots of different people represented, so thank you for being here. So I guess if you could give me, again, a scale of 1 to 5, your comfort level and experience with transition programming for students who come out of high school and go into their post-secondary lives. So 1 is not much at all, 5 is like you're a guru. 7. All right, so varied experience too. I'm hoping that this presentation covers not only some of the basics for people who don't have as much experience, but also I'm going to provide some resources and things too that maybe for people who have more experience, that might be something new or different that you could try as well. So hopefully we have something for everyone. Do my best. Okay, so I'm a little bit curious. What is your very favorite thing about the IEP process? So if you're a teacher, about writing an IEP. If you're a person with a disability, about growing up with an IEP, having an IEP. If you're a parent, participating in that process. Your very favorite thing. This is not a trick question. There are great things about IEPs, I think. So if you could just think about it for a second, and then turn to someone next to you and talk about it for just a minute or two. And go. perspectives in this room. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. So does anybody want to share? Do you feel comfortable? Anybody want to start? Yes.
One of my favorite parts is when kids get dismissed.
Oh, right.
No, because that's the ultimate success.
Yeah.
That a kid doesn't need the
I had
support
to,
anymore.
I can't let, at first I was like, oh. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I feel like everybody turn and
absolutely.
look at me and it's just like,
No, that's
I
totally.
want to be like Iron Man and put my shield up. No, because that's ultimately,
Right.
honestly, with the IEP process, that's ultimately, from me being a teacher, that's my goal.
Mhm.
Is for the kid to be, and I realize that's not realistic for every student, but that's ultimately the goal, is for the kid to get to the point where they don't need
Yeah.
an IEP anymore.
That's a really interesting perspective, yeah, for sure. Who else?
I think that every time there's an IEP meeting, it's always, very nerve-wracking, but the good part is that it's another opportunity for progress.
Yeah.
And so it's like a renewed hope for progress. That's what I like.
Absolutely.
Renee, do you want to share, or are you going to be shy?
Good.
I would just say for me, and again, I'll preface this by, I'm a supplier quality engineer. I get into math, science, statistics, probability, so I realize I'm a little weird. But for me, it's all about planning and execution, because, people always talk about, people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. And so I think, the majority of the effort's got to go into understanding what is the plan. I mean, you got the assessment part of it, but that part's worthless unless you actually plan out what are the services specifically to be provided, how are they provided, when are they provided,
Yeah.
who, why.
Absolutely.
Because when it comes down to execution, a former employer, they said that they had relationships built upon a foundation of operational excellence. And that sounds great, and everybody's like, well, that's business. It's like, well, why can't it work in a public government setting or a state or municipal? Why does it have to be such a foreign concept? You're providing a service. Either you do it well, you do it acceptable, you do it very well, or you suck. I mean, it's basically a 1 to 5 scale. And I get that, people from a government perspective, you don't hear too many 4s or 5s. But, instead of 1 or 2 being acceptable, let's make the 4 or 3. It's all in how you manage those expectations,
Yeah. Anybody else? Did you want to share?
For me as a parent, just that one time a year when I get to sit down with the whole team and get their perspective on growth that they see and changes that they see.
Yeah. I think it's such a good time to collaborate, and a nice goal to work toward is that you feel like it's not just that one time of year that you
Right.
can talk
Well,
right down to the
and that's
right.
it's more than that, but
Yeah.
it's when the whole team
Yeah.
is together in one
Very
room.
common. Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, this is gonna kill me. Okay. Okay. So we shared our thoughts for the group. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add to that part? I have a lot of favorite things about writing IEPs or participating in IEPs.
I thought I was weird.
Right? I know. Like some of you said, the collaboration aspect is really nice. We have to be really creative and put our heads together and figure out what's really going to work for this kid. How are we going to help get them there to the end goal? It's an opportunity to celebrate success, also kind of like you said. We can also do some problem solving, and more heads are better than one, for sure, for a lot of kids. So just the opportunity to talk with others and get their perspectives. And frankly, it's a time to be accountable. We are holding the student accountable to their role in things, and teachers. We're having to sit there and say, this is what I did this year. Maybe this is what I could try to do better next time or whatever. And parents as well, their communication and responsibility in the whole process too. It's a really nice way to get to know students better, to figure out what makes them tick. All of the assessments, interviews, and things like that go into it can be really valuable, especially if you pick the right ones, do it right. And it's a really good opportunity to build relationships with families, because that's what it should really be about. It should be about the student's voice and the family's voice, and our ideas all kind of coming together. And another really fun thing about IEPs is transition planning. So I'm just going to pause for a quick second and find out if I could hear from you, what exactly is transition? Like, how would you define it? What am I talking about? It's a big word that encompasses a lot, so what is it? And what do we mean by transition programming? So either or, if anybody has some thoughts on one of those questions, what would you say? Sorry, mind the way. So what exactly is transition? How do you define it? And what exactly do we mean when we talk about transition programming? Yes.
Moving from childhood where you are dependent and relying on others to adulthood and independence.
Okay. So she said moving from childhood where you're dependent on others, reliant on others, and moving toward adulthood where you're independent. Yes.
I think that that's typically the first thing that would come to my mind as well, but I'm hoping that it's also, say, moving from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school or alternative school back to public transitional or traditional school.
For sure. A lot of the principles, when you think about the thing that always comes to my mind first when I hear transition is that move from high school to post-secondary or an adult transition program to life or whatever. But that's a good point. A lot of these principles are applicable to any transition in someone's life along the way. It's good to think about it, and it's also good. I know none of you are this person, but elementary teachers, in my opinion, shouldn't be left off the hook. I think even at a young age, it's so important to think about that end goal. Like, what are we working toward? And I think every elementary teacher I know, it has sort of that idea in mind, but for me, because of my role, it's always in the forefront of my mind, and I think it's good for the younger kids as well. Yes.
I guess for me, I think about resilience. You know, that ability to take, you know, what has been learned before and apply it in a new setting, but also resilience. It just, whether someone's on the autism spectrum or not, one thing I see in a lot of cases, not just kids, it's adults, is people don't cope well with change. Well, if nobody's told you, change is more often, more gut-wrenching, and it's going to happen more often than you like. So just put on your big girl panties or your big boy panties and roll with it, you know, because, you know, if we as parents and educators can't roll with it, seriously, aren't we a bunch of hypocrites telling kids to do it? You know.
Yeah, and I think you're right, your point before about making sure that there's a plan that you're following and like have a goal in mind and get there, and it's a whole, like whatever we can do to not have as many of those punches thrown at us, that's great through planning, but you're right, it's always going to happen.
Life happens.
So, right. Okay, end of the pause. I think, so we have a good understanding, I think, of what we're talking about with transition, but I have a more detailed definition in just a little bit, but I wanted to talk about the why. I think the why is always important for almost anything, and why is transition planning such a big deal to me? Why is it on my list of one of my favorite things about IEPs? For me, there are lots of reasons. Anybody want to share? Sorry, I keep stopping and making you talk to me. We can just move on if nobody has thoughts. But what do you think?
Well, it's hard to move from where you are now to where you want to be if you don't have a plan for how to get there.
Right. Right. And that plan and the transition process, as I'll talk about in detail in a little bit, needs to sort of drive everything when we get to the secondary level. So to me, secondary programming is transition programming. When we get to middle school and high school, in my mind, I'm always thinking about that, whether a kid is in a science class or in a life skills class or at a community site volunteering. That's always in my mind. How is this going to benefit them when they graduate? What if they feel, sometimes I hear kids say that this is dumb, what do I have to do this or whatever. And I hear that, and then I try to have a conversation with them about, okay, if you think the content is dumb or whatever, what else can we get out of this? What other skills can you learn, like resilience and things like that along the way, and strategies? How can we make this a little better for you? So there's always a way to link in transition and planning. Also, frankly, it's about quality of life for students and for families. We need to make the process as smooth as we can because it's a lot. It's a lot for people to go through and understand. Going from a school-based system where you usually have a contact teacher or case manager that's like your one person, your point person, to a community setting where there's so many different entities and people involved in making the plan. And just acronyms, like everything has letters all the time. And it's hard. It's hard to remember what all that is. So, also in my opinion, it's our last chance to do our best work for these kids. Once they get to high school or in a transition program, the end is in sight, and we have to kick it into high gear and really have a good plan and communicate well. It just in general can have a really significant impact on student outcomes. The more prepared we are, the more prepared we help them be. So just to kind of go along with that, this is from a CISA slide, and it's from 2010, but I don't think the numbers are all that different right now. And it's a bit of a bummer slide, unfortunately, but it says that when young adults with autism leave the public school system, nearly 80% still live at home. Almost half have no jobs or post-secondary training. 40% never have contact with friends. 17% never feel hopeful about the future. 21% never engage in outside activities, and many experience a decrease in insurance coverage and therapy services. So that's dismal, right? What were you saying?
Well, I guess I would say based on the date there, the decrease in insurance coverage probably no longer applies because
Right.
parents have insurance, it's not until 26.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not political ideologue, but I don't see that changing. But from a therapy service standpoint, yeah, I mean, I got pretty good insurance in my job as an engineer, and, they don't cover therapy service. I mean, in fact, it goes so far as to say, make sure you apply for Medicaid, the Children's Long-Term Support Waiver.
Right.
So I guess that's a little better than a lot of places who don't tell you jack. But,
Yeah. That's a good point, though. This data is almost 10 years old now, so I can definitely get that updated. But I think in general, like, you get the point. Like, it's a system and outcomes that we can't be comfortable with. Yes.
Why is it bad to still live at home if you have a disability?
I think like the idea, right, that you're with family. I think some people have the perspective that, like, as a marker for success and independence, someone will live on their own. But I can see your perspective too, and I think that's why it's so important to involve the family and the student, because what is a good outcome for someone might not be for another person. So, as a scientist who's studying measures of independence and success, that's kind of the traditional, like, oh, you live in your own apartment and you have your own job and you do all these things, which might not be right.
I would trust my daughter.
So do you have something in your slides about like best practices?
Yeah, so I should probably hurry because we're getting behind. Okay, so with all of this, of course we know that with IDEA, we have legal obligations to provide transition services as well. We need to make measurable goals and using appropriate assessments, determine baselines and how to move forward to reach those goals. We also need to clearly delineate services that we will implement in order to reach the goals as well. We also know that districts are bound to report progress on these measures. This is called Indicator 13. Is everyone familiar with this? So it's a measure of accountability for districts. What happens is there's a record of the percentage of youths age 16 and over, or 14 in Wisconsin, who are part of the transition process, who have really high quality comprehensive transition programming in their IEPs. And each district sort of gets a score on that. there
Is
needs
that part
to.
of their DPI like scorecard, or is that a completely
I
separate
think
document?
it's separate, but you can find it on the DPI website.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Oh, and then at a certain point, when it becomes appropriate, also it's important to invite outside agencies to IEP meetings. If they're going to be funding any services or that idea is on the table, they need to be there, but you need to get written consent from parents. So if you have a kid who's going to be aging out sometime in the near future, make sure that you get written consent and invite DVR or long-term services and supports. So I just put on here, what I wanted to make clear about this, or the reason I have this is a PTP. Does it look familiar to everybody? It's the post-secondary transition plan for each kid. We've been using this form for quite a while now in Wisconsin, so teachers, I think, should be pretty used to it. But what's nice about it is that if you do it and do it well and take it seriously, it walks through literally every single one of those legal requirements. So it includes the goals, it includes the services you're going to implement, everything that is legally required of districts. If you fill this out and do it, you'll be good. So it just kind of talks about meeting attendance. The student has to be there, has to be invited. Talks about goals and how those goals are developed based on assessments. Talks about specific goals in the areas of education, employment, and independent living skills. We need to remember those as well. And annual goals. So one of the things that's really important about a PTP is it's part of the IEP process, but it's online, it's not from a different site, it's from DPI. So you don't necessarily use your regular IEP software to create it. So sometimes it can feel a little bit like an afterthought, I think, because it's not just part of the whole process, or it feels separate somehow, but it really should not be separate. It should be forefront, front and center, and that's why they do require that you put in annual goals as well to demonstrate that your annual goals in the IEP somehow relate to transition planning. It doesn't have to be all of the goals, but you just need to show that at least something that they're working on academically or in school is related to transition. Also, there are many, many, many options for transition services. And this is where the team lists out what everyone's going to do, when, who's responsible for it, things like that. I'm really skipping over this stuff kind of quickly, but you can find you can find this all on the DPI website. So we will, and I'll show you the link for that too. Okay, so knowing these laws, knowing these legal requirements, where do we get stuck? So there are rules and guidelines about everything that needs to be involved, and if everything is involved and included, it should go pretty well, I think. But sometimes we get stuck or we drop the ball. For me, some of the things I need to keep thinking about and always keep working on is student involvement. So there are lots of creative ways to get students involved in an IEP meeting or an IEP process. Am I prioritizing student-led IEPs? Am I doing more than just inviting the student and having them sit there and listen while everyone around the table talks about them and not hearing their voice? Or for some students who don't communicate in the same way, there are lots of other ways as well to get input. We can show pictures of them doing their job, we can have videos, we can involve them so that they can see that they're the topic of this conversation as well. Also, do we use high-quality transition assessments? Are we using actual assessments that are comprehensive? Part of the PTP says that the assessment needs to really be comprehensive. It needs to assess independent living skills, educational goals, vocational skills, all of those things. And are we really doing that? Or is it more like anecdotal? Like, oh yeah, I think maybe this guy said this once that maybe he wants to work at McDonald's. We need to actually have real data and assessments. And then we need to also be clear, again, that we're connecting the transition plan to the IEP. Is it forefront in our minds, or sometimes like I said, it could feel a bit like an afterthought. So the two that we're going to talk about the rest of the day today, which isn't much time, is just, I'm going to give you some examples of transition assessments, as well as ways to connect those assessments to the plan and some curriculum or activities or lesson planning options to get at some of these skills, independent living skills and employment skills and things like that. Sometimes all of this can feel like a lot. So there are a lot of resources out there though. So when I give you the presentation, you'll have access to this link to CSUB. This is on there. It gives you sort of a flow chart or well, not really a timeline, I guess, isn't of times, but the different steps to take in the transition process. So step 1 here is age-appropriate assessments. Then we're going to use those assessments, which are looking at needs, strengths, preferences, and interests. And we're going to use the information in there to write goals that are focused on those 3 big areas: education and training, employment, and independent living. Then we have the goals. We can start thinking about the services. How are we going to actually reach those goals? What instruction will we provide? What related services do the students need? Community experiences and adult living objectives. Then, once we know the services, we can write out the course of study. So we might say in this part, in the transition services part, okay, I think they need some instruction in social skills to understand how to interact in the workplace. But what exactly does that look like? What does that instruction entail? So that's that step. We coordinate services with adult agencies, so family care, IRIS, DVR, whatever the long-term support agency that might be involved is, and then we write the annual IEP goals. So all of these things along the way ultimately impact the goals for the IEP. We're not going to define transition assessment. I'll just let you know that it is an ongoing process. It's not something that you necessarily just want to do once a year. You want to always be looking for feedback from kids and families about how they think things are going. And it really needs to value the kids' needs, preferences, and interests as well. So, again, like I said before, the transition assessment is the first step. It's the first step in writing the post-secondary goals, figuring out transition services, and the annual IEP goals. So all of that is connected. And then here's just another visual of the different things that the transition assessment should address if it's going to be considered a fully comprehensive assessment. There are, as in everything, formal and informal assessments. So I decided to put this picture on of Converse because they're cute. So I'm not going to go through specifically all of these, but I did want you to have this resource as some ideas of how to formally assess and informally assess self-determination. So I have one of these for every category. So we talked about self-determination assessments, independent living assessments, career assessments, and academic. So if you go through these slides, there are some options listed for all of these categories. Some of them are free, some of them you have to pay for. So for example, in the self-determination assessment, there's the AIR self-determination assessment, there's the ARC self-determination scale, there's Choice Maker, Field and Hoffman. All of these will pick out the skills that students need in order to be self-determining their education and their outcomes, and know what areas you need to work on to allow that to happen. There are also formal assessments for independent living. I think probably most people have heard of Casey Life Skills. Does anyone use that still? Supports intensity scale. There's the transition skills inventory. And there are a lot of these out there. When I first started working with transition, it was hard to find some of this stuff. I don't know what it was, but everything was expensive. And now a lot of the websites, like Career Cruising and just different websites that we use frequently, will include an assessment component right on their websites. For careers, there's ONET, YES, Career Cruising, and ASVAB. Again, there are many more. And then academic assessments are sort of the easiest. We do those all the time. Yes?
Have you used the app?
The transition app?
Yeah.
I have, but not in the last year or so.
Okay.
Is there a resource on there that,
Just because I use it with my students,
Yeah.
and it almost allows the students to write their own PTP.
that's amazing. That's a really good resource.
It's a constant transition app.
Yeah. And where do you find that? I can't even, is it on the
Wherever you
web
get
page
your apps, either
or-
through the Google Play Store or.
Okay.
It's actually, it can be web-based too.
Okay,
Well, I'll find it quick.
I could pull it up too.
Is it the WI transition?
Yes.
Yeah, it's got just a bunch of little people with the state of Wisconsin on it.
Okay,
So that's the little icon.
yeah. I can put it up.
And it's
here.
nice too, if the kid can't attend the meeting, you can still get some of their input. That's it.
So yeah, oh yeah, this is awesome. You can, it has instructions for you, you can start a PTP.
And by and large, most, like I work with high school kids, most of them can just go right to the, you don't have to read the instructions. It's, for some kids, it'll be pretty
Yeah. That's very cool. I'm going to pass that along and just remind the team back at school about it too. I knew about it before and then kind of forgot about it, so that's really cool. I don't, well yeah, I'll talk about it later. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, and actually that is sort of the next thing on the list. So like I said, I don't want to just read to you off of the thing all these assessments, like I'll give you this PowerPoint or this slideshow and you can look things up if you're looking for something specific. But I wondered if we could take some time to share resources like that, either about assessments that you use. I think one thing that's tricky about picking out these formal assessments is that they usually one assessment doesn't usually work for all the kids on your caseload. Every kid's so different that something that works well for one is a disaster for another. It's just completely inappropriate. So that's why there are so many to choose from. You kind of have to pick and choose what's going to work. And it absolutely has to be a combination of formal assessments and informal observations, daily work, looking at their daily work, watching them on job sites, things like that. Does anybody have ideas? How do you like to assess transition skills in any of those areas? No? Well, if anyone thinks of anything, let me know. And I can add it to the list when I share it. Okay. The other thing is, when you get the PowerPoint, I did link some of the kind of big resources we have available to us. So you'll be able to click on each picture and go to these websites. So there's NTACT, National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. This is the CISA project link. It takes you directly to the transition-related page, but remember there are 4 domains, so there are other things to look at there as well, behavior and academic skills and things like that. Also, in the transition section, there's more to transition in the CISA program than just assessment. This is just one small piece of it. They also have community mapping. They have guidelines on how to do work-based learning in the school or out of the school. There's a lot there, a lot of resources the study is over now, the research part of the study, the intervention stage. So now they're looking at data and seeing how things all worked out. But the resources are still up on the page. Then we have, everyone's probably familiar with the Transition Improvement Grant webpage. Lots of good resources here. And I just have to make a plug. I came across one as I was looking through. I appreciate that they included the culturally and linguistically responsive practices in transition planning. When I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that's super important for every single step of the way in education. So I just recommend, I think they don't have a ton of information here yet, but if you're interested in equity and issues around social justice and things like that, I would look back at that and look for events or things that might be coming up about that. And then the DPI has a transition webpage as well. Like I said, there's so much out there, so many resources, but sometimes it's hard to know where to look for them. Then let's see. The next step after you do your assessment is to document the results of it. That seems pretty obvious. In the CISA website, they have a transition assessment summary sheet. So it just kind of lists out the things that you've done so that you have a running record of all the different ways you've looked into things and what the results were, what the kids' preferences were, which is kind of a nice idea. And you wouldn't have to do it in a worksheet. You could kind of make your own thing on Google Docs or whatever your district uses most, just to kind of track things. Then we use that information to write our goals. And like we said, the PTP sort of walks you through everything. So there's on the CISA presentation, there was this helpful formula. Now, basically in the PTP, there are drop-down menus, and it's all right there for you. So you're going to be pretty specific. After high school, the student will blank, will have a job working 20 hours per week at Target, doing stocking shelves or whatever, with support from a job coach. So you want to be pretty specific, and it can change through the IEP process every year, but to have a very specific outcome in mind is helpful because then you can target your interventions and services to that. All right, this is some examples of specific goal writing. Sometimes I've seen in IEPs that I've gotten, it'll say like, after high school, John will work at a hair salon. But it doesn't list enough other information about it. Like we need to know when, what's the time frame, who's going to help, how's he going to make that happen, how are we going to help him make that happen, or what supports will he need in that process. Okay, so then after you do this, it's sort of like this whole process, right? So use the assessments to guide programming, you choose curriculum that matches the student's needs, you evaluate the process frequently, and then you make changes. And sort of this whole cycle that keeps going on and on, assessing, checking if it's working, just like with any IEP goal. Okay, so one more opportunity to share. Does anybody have programming or curricular tools, resources, or ideas to share with the group for the good of everyone? Yes.
I have more of a question.
Sure.
Because we have like a lot of expertise in the group.
Yeah.
Too. So for the independent living part of the, there are 3 areas you said that are on PTP. Is it enough to just say the student will live at home? So for students, for example, who have autism with potentially some intellectual disability too, where this student is not going to be living, in their own apartment, but still could potentially be learning skills to be more independent even with their parents. So I don't know, because I saw somewhere on there it said if needed or something. So is that enough of a goal?
Oh, so the reason it said if needed is because some of our students truly don't need an independent living goal necessarily. Some of our students who have a specific learning disability or things like that can kind of do the regular typical college route or something pretty much on their own. But a lot of our students who have autism or intellectual disabilities or even EBD do need some sort of independent living goal. Like we need to think about that for all kinds of kids. And I would not necessarily, if it was me, and I don't know if maybe people can speak to specific guidelines, but I would not just say he'll live at home and that's the end of the story. I would definitely give more information about what that looks like. What's his role at home? How can he be independent? What more can he do to contribute to his family life? And is there a plan that he might decide to live in an apartment on his own someday in the future? Like, these are all things to think about and plan for. And just saying he'll live at home, period, isn't really enough in my opinion. Does anybody else have more to add about that?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting to talk to families and see too that a lot of teens on the autism spectrum who've had a lot of intensive in-home services end up with better cooking, cleaning, functional skills like that than their siblings that are neurotypical.
Right, that's
Kudos
interesting.
to all of the, work that people are doing. I think all the teenagers should have a
Absolutely.
transition plan.
Mhm. That's a good point. Any other questions about that? So I did this thing where I put way too much information for a 1-hour presentation, I guess. So I'm kind of breezing through, and I apologize for that, and I hope that you are able to look at things a little bit more. These are just this is this tiny little sample of some things I've used over the years to get kids input and to teach them of these skills. I like this, it's called, her story is Life Skills Creations. It's on Teachers Pay Teachers. So again, this is one of those informal things where you're getting input, but it's not necessarily like a normed scientific assessment, but it gives you some valuable information. So you have the kids go through and you kind of see what they know about different professions, and then there's a component of it, and she has just tons of resources. So if you're looking for resources for kids who, she has things in life skills, math, community reading, based reading, transition, financial planning, job skills. She's got a lot, and there are a lot of people who do put good things on Teachers Pay Teachers. I like this one because it's pretty simple and straightforward, and it gives the opportunity for students who have a hard time explaining or talking about their preferences. They can point if they want to. Which one looks more interesting? And maybe they just like that it's brighter in the retail store or whatever, but that's fine. It doesn't matter why. Whatever looks interesting to them is fine, and it's a good way to get input. This is a task analysis I did with kids. Sorry, these are sort of just in whatever order I came across them, so it's a little bit jumbled, but task analysis is a really good idea to use for teaching job skills in the school or in the community. It writes out, and you can use pictures, you can do it on video. It's a great way to do a task analysis. It's just a really clear step-by-step schedule of what needs to happen at each moment in the job. And the way it can be related to assessment is that you can use this idea, and not only is it a tool for the student, but it's also a tool for the teacher who can go through and maybe give it a score. Like if the student needed a ton of help with it that day, hand-over-hand assistance or something, they could give it a score of a 1. But if they're totally independent, it could be a 5. And so it can be just helpful for multiple reasons. Helpful for the kid, helpful for the teacher as a form of assessment. This was an assignment that I had one of my students do, or had my class do, where I asked them to look up information about jobs they might be interested in someday. So again, I tried to have multiple outcomes or purposes in mind. They had to do some internet research, they had to find applications, they had to write down what they had come across, so it reinforced some writing and English skills as well. This is a student progress monitoring tool. So they were monitoring their own progress on these different tasks or important parts about their work. So they would look at were they on time, yes or no, and they would rate themselves, and the teacher or support staff would also rate them. So were they on time? Did they follow the rules? Were they respectful, efficient, and did they go above and beyond? Did they go to their supervisor and say, what else can I do to help? Is there anything more that you need from me? So those were just, I had a group of students who were a little bit energetic, I guess is the right word. So just to kind of help them be aware of their role and their soft skills that are so important for having a job, that's how I asked them to monitor their progress. This is a good curriculum. Does anybody know about this one? Skills to pay the bills. Sometimes DVR will implement it. I like it. At first, when I started looking at it, I was like, ooh, kids are gonna think this is hokey or whatever. But I get pretty good buy-in when I use it with kids. It just goes through some scenarios and ideas about how to behave in the workplace environment. So soft skills again. Oop, I had that one already. This is just an example of one way to get parent or guardian input. Every year at the beginning when I would start with my transition kids, I would have like a handbook and I would give it to parents and we'd kind of have a meeting and go through and I would get their feedback right away about what was important to them for their kids to learn. This is a cool resource from the Wisconsin Promise program. It's a transition resource guide. So what I like about it is that it goes through every step of the way, all of the acronyms and different things that might come up, and gives families some guidance. A lot of people probably know the Opening Doors series. There's just a bunch of other things that are listed in here that you can look through. Okay, then I have a question for you. Why was there a picture of a road on the first slide? That's what it looked like.
I'm gonna guess it's this process.
So this is the process?
You get where you're going.
Yeah. So as I was making this presentation, I was thinking like, okay, I need to have some sort of imagery or metaphor or something, whatever. And that's what kept coming into my mind was a road for lots of different reasons. First of all, because I think of the PTP as the thing that once you get to secondary level, it should drive the IEP. Transition should drive the meeting and the course of study and just programming in general. Also, we need to make this an easy road for families to travel. We need to provide resources and information in an easy to understand format. And high quality assessments and planning really well can provide a roadmap for teachers and parents and everybody. Okay, then I have one last thing, like one more metaphor. I know it's really late, we're gonna go, it's gonna be fast. So to me, transition planning feels like sometimes a big job. Like there's a lot riding on things, a lot of information to give out to families. And just, it's really important to stop and take a minute to do the correct assessments, to make a good plan, because it's like climbing a mountain. And when you get to the top, you want to be able to look and see the beautiful scene below and see the success that the kid had. And if you forget to do the assessment part or the really careful planning, sometimes you can accidentally climb the wrong mountain. And you end up at the top or on the way up to some other place that you, it turns out, don't want to be at, or the kid doesn't want to be at, or isn't appropriate for them. So just really from the very beginning, being careful to get good assessments, be really open and honest with parents about strengths and needs and challenges will help you avoid some of those pitfalls and not climb the wrong mountain. I had another metaphor, but I'm going to skip that one. And then, again, I'm just putting a plug in because I was really excited to see that culturally and linguistically responsive practices thing. And if people are interested in transition, I also came across this. There's the Transition Academy in October. That's, I think, put on by the Wisconsin Transition Improvement Grant. So if you're looking for more learning on transition, that might be a good option. And that's it.